The royal ball was in full swing, the chandeliers overhead casting a golden glow over the sea of glistening gowns and tailored suits. Laughter and music filled the air, the murmur of courtly conversations almost drowned out by the crescendo of violins. But among the noble guests, there was one who didn't belong. Tanya stood at the edge of the grand hall, her hands trembling as she adjusted the hem of the plain gown she had borrowed from the seamstress. She could barely believe she was here, at the palace no less. How had she gotten this far? Her heart pounded in her chest as she glanced around at the glittering elites. She was nothing like them. Her dress, though simple, clung to her body in a way that made her feel too visible, too out of place. She wasn't a noblewoman, wasn't even a lady-in-waiting. She was a maid, an employee of the palace, and for the longest time she had resigned herself to that role. Yet tonight, everything had changed. Tonight, Prince Kieran of Talbora had seen her. Not the maid, not the lowly servant scrubbing the floors. No, he had looked into her eyes and seen something more, something worth noticing. Tanya had never imagined her life would turn out like this. She had always been content, or rather, resigned, to her place. But there was something about the way the prince had looked at her, like he saw the woman beneath the uniform. As she stood there, paralyzed by doubt, the prince's voice reached her ears. He was standing just a few feet away, surrounded by his court, yet his gaze was fixed solely on her. "Tanya," he called, his voice low, commanding the attention of those around him. His eyes never left hers. "Come here." It wasn't a request. It was an invitation, one that no one in the room expected. A murmur rippled through the crowd. Tanya's heart dropped to her stomach. What was he doing? Why was he calling her over like this? This wasn't supposed to happen. She had been invisible in this palace, an unnoticed servant cleaning up after the royals. But now, she felt the weight of the entire room's eyes on her. She was just a maid, no more, no less. She shouldn't be standing here with the prince, the heir to the throne. But something in his gaze, something soft yet intense, made her take a step forward, her legs shaky, her mind racing. "Tanya," Prince Kieran repeated, this time with a hint of a smile. "Come. You're the reason the flowers in this hall are so fragrant tonight." The crowd's whispers grew louder. The prince was inviting her to stand by his side. This wasn't supposed to be happening. As she made her way through the sea of surprised faces, Tanya could feel every step echoing in her mind. She wasn't a noblewoman. She wasn't anything special. So why had he chosen her? And yet, as she reached him, Prince Kieran stepped closer, taking her hand with a tenderness that made her chest ache. "I've been watching you," he said quietly, almost to himself, but loud enough for her to hear. "You've caught my eye, Tanya. I can't stop thinking about you." Before we dive deeper into the story, what do you think about Tanya's sudden transformation from a maid to someone being noticed by a prince? Do you think the prince sees her for who she truly is, or is this just a fleeting moment? Let us know your thoughts in the comments. Before this night, Tanya had never felt like she mattered. She had spent the past few years of her life working as a maid in the royal palace of Talbora, a small, secluded kingdom known for its wealth and breathtaking landscapes. The palace, with its gold-framed mirrors, sweeping staircases, and endless rooms, was a place of grandeur, one where Tanya never thought she'd belong. The closest she had come to being a part of this world was in the kitchens, sweeping floors and scrubbing dishes, her face often hidden behind a mop or the heavy curtains of the ballroom. The work wasn't easy, but it was honest. She had been raised to work hard, to never ask for more, and to know her place. She was the daughter of a seamstress in the neighboring village, and while her mother had always hoped for a better life for her, Tanya had learned long ago to temper those dreams. She had seen enough of the world to know where she stood, among the common folk, far below the noble blood that coursed through the veins of the royals. Still, She could remember a time when she was younger, sitting on the steps of her mother's shop, watching the wealthy women walk by in their fine dresses and jewels. She had dreamed of one day having a life like theirs, a life filled with beauty and sophistication. But reality had quickly settled in, reality that said she would never be more than what she was, a maid in a royal palace. As for love, love had always felt like a distant luxury, like something only reserved for people who didn't have to worry about their next meal or how to pay rent. Tanya had been in relationships before, of course, but they had always felt temporary, fleeting moments that didn't last, filled with the weight of insecurity and fear of being abandoned. She had learned not to hope for more. But that had all changed the moment she saw Prince Kieran for the first time. He wasn't like the other princes or nobles who passed through the palace. He didn't have that cold, distant air about him that seemed to surround the rest of the royal family. He was different, his presence commanding but not arrogant. His eyes, dark yet full of warmth, seemed to see through the walls she had built around herself. And when he spoke, his voice held a depth that made her heart race in ways she couldn't understand. At first, she thought nothing of it. She was a maid. He was a prince. What could possibly come of a simple glance, a polite smile? But then, he had started paying attention to her. Little things at first, a nod of recognition when he passed by her in the hall, a brief exchange of words over the breakfast table where she served him. But as the days went on, those small moments grew longer, more intense. Tanya had tried to ignore it, telling herself it didn't matter. A prince could never fall for a maid, especially not someone like her. She was awkward, plain, and not nearly as refined as the women he usually surrounded himself with. But still, she couldn't deny the connection that was forming between them. The way his gaze lingered just a little too long, the way his smile made her heart flutter in her chest. Tonight, at the ball, she had been invisible once more, until the moment he had called her name. Prince Kieran. Tanya had never considered the possibility that someone like him would notice someone like her. But here he was, standing before her now, as if everything she had believed about her life was suddenly untrue. Her mind raced as she tried to process what was happening. How was this even possible? The prince, heir to the throne, had chosen her, a simple maid. As they stood together amidst the aristocratic crowd, Tanya could feel every eye on her. The room was buzzing with whispers, eyes wide with disbelief, but there was no turning back now. The prince had claimed her presence in front of everyone, and despite her nerves, despite the weight of the stairs, she couldn't bring herself to look away from him. "May I have this dance?" Prince Kieran asked, his hand still holding hers. His voice was soft, but there was a firmness to it that left no room for argument. Tanya opened her mouth to protest, but no words came. What could she say? That she wasn't the woman he thought she was? That she didn't belong here, in this royal court, surrounded by people who lived in a world of luxury and wealth? But somehow, when his gaze met hers again, intense, steady, she found herself nodding. "Yes," she whispered, surprised by the strength of her own voice. As they stepped into the center of the ballroom, the violins played a slow, melodic tune. Tanya's heart was racing in her chest, and she tried to ignore the sudden wave of panic that washed over her. She was supposed to be invisible, out of place, but now, as she stood next to the prince, her whole world felt like it was shifting beneath her feet. He led her gracefully through the waltz, his hand firm on her back. Despite the elegant ballroom and the glittering faces around them, it felt like they were alone. Like the world had narrowed down to just the two of them, he, the prince, and she, the maid with no hope of ever belonging in his world. But as the music swirled around them, Tanya realized something she couldn't ignore. The prince wasn't treating her like a maid. He wasn't looking at her as someone beneath him. In fact, he was looking at her as if she were everything. The dance ended far too soon for Tanya's liking, and as the final note of the waltz drifted away, she felt an unsettling mix of relief and longing. The prince had held her so effortlessly, so naturally, as if she belonged in his arms. And the way he had looked at her, his gaze intense, almost possessive, Tanya's chest tightened at the thought. He had seen her, truly seen her. And yet the room remained silent, filled with whispers, with eyes that burned into her like fire. No one had expected this. The prince had asked her to dance, a mere maid, no less. She was nothing compared to the other women here, the noble ladies who had been born into wealth, into grace, into royalty. Yet she had just danced with the prince like it was the most natural thing in the world. Tanya's heart was racing, her mind spinning, when the quiet voice of her mentor, Elise, broke through the noise of her thoughts. "Tanya, come with me," Elise said, her voice calm but firm. Elise was one of the older servants in the palace, a woman who had worked here for over 20 years. She had taken Tanya under her wing when she first arrived, teaching her everything she knew about palace life, the rules, and the boundaries that should never be crossed. Tanya hesitated for a moment, her feet feeling like they were stuck in place. The whispers of the court were getting louder, but the last thing she wanted was to disappoint Elise. Reluctantly, Tanya followed Elise down a side corridor, away from the crowd. The flickering candlelight illuminated the stone walls as they walked in silence. It wasn't until they reached a small, quiet room near the servants' quarters that Elise finally spoke. "Tanya, do you realize what you've just done?" Elise's voice was steady, but there was a trace of concern in her eyes. Tanya swallowed hard, the weight of her actions finally settling in. "I didn't mean to—" "You didn't mean to?" Elise interrupted, her tone sharp but not unkind. "Tanya, you're a maid. You've been working here for years, and you just danced with the Prince Kieran. Do you understand what that means?" Tanya bit her lip, her hands trembling slightly. She hadn't meant to cause a scene. She hadn't meant to stand out. All she had wanted was to fade into the background, to do her work and go unnoticed. But tonight was different. I didn't ask for any of this, Elise. He just asked me to dance. He didn't even look at me the way I thought he would." Tanya's voice faltered as she tried to find the right words. Elise placed a gentle hand on her shoulder. "Tanya, listen to me. You're a maid, and that's what you'll always be in their eyes. You can't forget that. Prince Kieran is a prince. And people like him, people like us, don't belong in the same world. If you let yourself believe that there's a future here, you'll be setting yourself up for heartbreak." The words stung, more than Tanya expected. Her chest tightened with a mixture of frustration and confusion. She had already felt the walls of the palace close in on her, the unspoken rules that kept her separated from the rest of the world. But tonight, for the first time, she had felt seen, really seen. "But why would he do that?" Tanya asked, her voice small. "Why would he call me out in front of everyone? Why would he dance with me like that?" Elise shook her head, her expression softened with a quiet pity. "You don't know how this works. Princes are often curious about the lives of common folk. Sometimes they like to see the world through our eyes, but that doesn't mean they want to be with someone like us. He might have danced with you, Tanya, but that doesn't mean he wants to marry you. He's a prince. He has a duty. And that duty is to marry someone from his own world." Tanya stared at the floor, the words sinking in like stones into a deep well. She had already known the divide. She had seen it every day in the way the royal family interacted with the servants, in the way they avoided looking at those of lower status. But for some reason, tonight, that divide felt larger, more impenetrable than it had ever felt before. "I'm not good enough for him, am I?" Tanya whispered, her voice tinged with self-doubt. Elise sighed, her hand still on Tanya's shoulder. "No, it's not about being good enough. It's about the world you come from. He can't marry someone like you, Tanya. He has to marry someone who fits his status, someone who can help secure the future of this kingdom. A maid can't do that. Tanya swallowed hard, the words cutting deeper than she wanted to admit. But a part of her, some deep, stubborn part, refused to believe it. Why not? She wasn't like the other women in the palace, true. She didn't wear gowns of silk or jewels that sparkled in the light. But she had something else. Something more. Didn't she? I don't know what to do, Tanya admitted, the tears threatening to spill. What if he's not like the others? Elise gave her a sympathetic look but pulled away slightly. I want you to be careful, Tanya. The heart can be a dangerous thing, and if you're not careful, it could lead you to places that will only break you. The door creaked open, interrupting their conversation, and Tanya looked up, her heart skipping a beat. Prince Kieran stood there, his eyes locked on hers with that same intensity from before. His presence filled the small room, and Tanya felt as if the world had shifted once again. Tanya, he said, his voice soft but clear. I need to speak with you. Alone. Elise's eyes flicked between the two of them before she gave a quiet, understanding nod and stepped out of the room, leaving Tanya and the prince standing together, the weight of the world suddenly pressing in on them both. The room felt smaller with each passing second as Prince Kieran stepped further inside, the door clicking shut behind him. Tanya stood frozen in place, her heart pounding against her ribs. She had tried to prepare herself for this moment, tried to tell herself that the prince's attention was nothing more than a fleeting curiosity, a momentary lapse in royal protocol. But now that he was standing in front of her, the weight of his gaze felt almost unbearable. He didn't speak immediately, his eyes sweeping over her as though taking in every inch of her. Tanya, self-conscious as always, felt suddenly exposed, as if the plainness of her simple maid's gown was a glaring contrast to the regal aura that seemed to surround him. I didn't mean to make you feel uncomfortable, Prince Kieran said finally, his voice softer than she had expected. I had to see you again. Tanya bit her lip, struggling to find the right words. Why? Why would he need to see her? She was nothing. She was a servant, a maid who had no place in his world. You've been acting strange, Tanya, he continued, his voice a little more serious now. Since the dance. You've been avoiding me, as if I've done something wrong. Her mind raced. How could she explain what she was feeling? How could she explain the chaos inside her, the way everything had shifted in an instant? She had no words for that. I haven't been avoiding you, Tanya said, her voice barely above a whisper. I just don't understand why you're doing this. Why me? Prince Kieran took a step closer, his expression softening. Because you're different, Tanya. I see something in you that I don't see in the others. Tanya's chest tightened at his words. The others. He meant the noble women, the women who had been born into wealth and privilege, women who knew how to navigate the intricacies of royal life. Tanya was nothing like them. She didn't belong here. You're not like the others, Kieran said again, as if reading her thoughts. And I can't stop thinking about you. Tanya felt a knot form in her throat. But I'm just a maid, she whispered, as though the words could explain everything. I don't belong in your world. For a moment there was a silence between them, thick with unspoken emotions. Then Kieran spoke again, his voice barely audible, as if speaking the words aloud made them more real. I don't care about that. Tanya shook her head, disbelief flooding her. You should care, she said. Your world doesn't work like that. You're a prince, Kieran. You need to marry someone who fits your world, who fits your station. Someone who can carry the title of princess with dignity. Is that what you think of me? He asked, a flash of hurt crossing his face. That I'm just like them? That I care more about titles and appearances than the person I care about? Tanya's breath caught in her throat. I'm not the person you care about. You don't even know me. Kieran's eyes narrowed as he took another step toward her, closing the distance between them. I know more about you than you think. I see the way you work, how you never complain, how you make sure everything runs smoothly, even when the palace is at its most chaotic. I see how you stand apart from the others, with your quiet grace. And that's what draws me to you, Tanya. You're real. Tanya felt a rush of emotions she couldn't control. She wanted to step back, to run away, but her feet were rooted to the spot. This wasn't supposed to be happening. This wasn't real. But here he was, standing in front of her, and for the first time, she realized just how deeply his words were cutting into her heart. You're not real, she said, barely able to breathe through the sudden lump in her throat. This can't be real. You're a prince, and I'm just a maid. I don't belong here. Kieran reached out and gently cupped her chin, lifting her gaze to meet his. His touch was warm, grounding, and it made her chest ache. I don't care about your station, Tanya. I care about you. I care about who you are. Tanya closed her eyes for a moment, trying to steady the chaos inside her. She had been raised to understand her place, to know where she belonged. And now, this prince, this man, was telling her that none of it mattered. But could she believe him? Could she trust that what he was offering was real, and not just a fleeting moment of royal whimsy? She opened her eyes, meeting his gaze once more. And what if it's not enough? She asked softly. What if you get caught up in all of this? Your title, your duty, and forget about me? The question lingered in the air between them, and Kieran's expression grew serious. Then I'll make sure you never feel forgotten, he said, his voice steady, filled with conviction. Because I know what I want, Tanya. And what I want is you. For the first time, Tanya felt her resolve begin to crack. She had spent her life pushing away dreams of something better, of a life beyond the walls of the palace. But here he was, offering her something more, a future that seemed impossible, but somehow within reach. She could feel the pull of his words, the promise in them, but she couldn't help but wonder if it was all too good to be true. A prince? And a maid? No, the world they lived in didn't work that way. There would be consequences, obstacles, and expectations that neither of them could possibly foresee. But as she looked into his eyes, those dark, earnest eyes, she realized that for the first time in her life, she wasn't afraid of what might come next. She didn't want to be afraid anymore. I don't know what this is, Kieran, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. But I'm scared. He smiled gently, brushing a strand of hair from her face. It's okay to be scared, but don't let that stop you. You're more than what this palace or these people say you are. You're worth so much more than you realize. Tanya felt the weight of his words settle into her heart. Could she really believe that? Could she really let herself imagine a future with him? A future where she wasn't just a maid, but a woman worthy of the prince's love? The next few days passed in a blur of stolen glances, secret conversations, and the haunting weight of the future pressing down on Tanya. Prince Kieran continued to seek her out, each moment they spent together adding more fuel to the fire that was burning inside her. He was relentless in his pursuit, and she, despite her reservations, found herself falling deeper into a connection she never imagined was possible. But despite the undeniable chemistry between them, there was always a quiet, unspoken tension that hung in the air. Tanya couldn't shake the feeling that something was off, that the future she dreamed of, this fairy tale romance with a prince, wasn't as simple as it seemed. It all came to a head one fateful afternoon when Tanya was called to the royal gardens to meet Kieran. The sun was shining, casting a golden hue over the palace's sprawling grounds, and everything felt like it was falling into place. But as she stepped onto the marble path that led to the garden, her heart began to race. Something in the air had changed, and she couldn't quite put her finger on it. As she walked toward the fountain in the center of the garden, she spotted Kieran standing with his back to her, speaking with a woman she had never seen before. Tall, graceful, and undeniably regal, the woman was wearing a gown of rich blue silk that shimmered in the sunlight. Her blonde hair cascaded down her back in soft waves, and her beauty was almost otherworldly. Tanya's breath caught in her throat as she slowed her pace. She didn't want to intrude, but she couldn't help overhearing their conversation. "I just don't understand why you're delaying this, Kieran," the woman said, her voice soft but firm. "The kingdom needs this marriage. We need you to marry Princess Isabel from Mevia. It's the only way to secure the future of Talbora." Kieran's response was quieter, more strained. "I know, Felicia, but I'm not ready. I can't marry her." Tanya's heart began to race as she moved closer, her stomach twisting into knots. She recognized the woman now. Felicia, the daughter of the Duke of Helver, one of the wealthiest and most powerful families in the kingdom. Felicia had been courted by the royal family for years, rumored to be the chosen bride for Prince Kieran. Everyone in the kingdom had assumed it was just a matter of time before they were married. "But why?" Felicia pressed, stepping closer to him. "You know this is for the good of the kingdom. We've been promised to each other for years. Our marriage will bring peace, stability. You know that." "I don't care about peace or stability right now, Felicia." Kieran's voice rose, filled with frustration and something Tanya couldn't quite read. "I care about her." Tanya froze. Her breath caught in her throat. Her? He wasn't talking about Felicia. He was talking about Tanya. "I can't marry someone I don't love," Kieran continued, his voice softening as he turned away from Felicia, running a hand through his hair. I won't. I won't marry for duty. I won't be forced into this." Felicia's expression faltered, and for a moment Tanya almost felt sorry for her. But it didn't matter. Kieran had spoken the words Tanya had needed to hear. He cared about her. He had chosen her. And in that moment, Tanya's heart soared, a bright spark of hope filling the dark corner of her mind that had always told her it could never happen. But just as quickly, her joy was overshadowed by a deeper, more troubling thought. Why hadn't Kieran told her about this? Why hadn't he told her that his family had already promised him to someone else? Was he leading her on, or was there something more going on behind the scenes? Felicia's voice broke through her thoughts, and Tanya stepped back, retreating into the shadows of the garden, her heart beating faster with every step. "If you don't marry me, Kieran," Felicia said quietly, "you'll destroy everything. You'll tear this kingdom apart. Your duty is to the people, not to her." Tanya felt a sharp pang in her chest at the words. Her. That's what she was to everyone in this palace, a maid, a distraction, nothing more. As she turned to leave, her mind racing, Kieran's voice called after her. "Tanya, wait! Please, don't leave!" Tanya's heart stopped, and she turned, trying to steady her breath. She looked at him, and despite everything she had just overheard, she couldn't deny that she still cared for him. She wanted to believe him, wanted to believe that his words were true. But how could she? "I heard everything," Tanya said quietly, her voice barely above a whisper. "You've been promised to her, haven't you? Felicia. She's the woman your family wants you to marry." Kieran's expression darkened as he stepped toward her. "Tanya, it's not like that. I never wanted this marriage. I don't care about my family's wishes or their political games. I care about you." "But how can I believe you?" Tanya's voice broke, her eyes stinging with unshed tears. "You're a prince. You have responsibilities, and I'm just a maid. I'm not meant for your world. I don't belong here." Kieran reached out for her, his touch gentle, but she pulled away, the distance between them growing in more ways than one. She wanted to trust him, to believe in the future he promised. But the reality of his world, the political pressures, the duty to his kingdom, felt suffocating. "You do belong here," Kieran insisted, his voice firm. "You belong with me. But this isn't just about us. I'm torn between what my family wants and what I know is right. And the more I'm with you, the more I know what's right." Tanya shook her head, the weight of his words settling heavily on her heart. "But if you love me, Kieran, why are you still considering her? Why are you still thinking about a marriage that isn't with me?" Kieran's eyes filled with regret, and for the first time, Tanya saw the full weight of the crown he wore, the burden of responsibility he couldn't shake, no matter how much he wanted to. "I have to make a choice, Tanya," he said quietly, almost to himself. "A choice that will affect the future of this kingdom. And no matter what I choose, someone will get hurt." Tanya's heart shattered, but she couldn't let him see it. She couldn't let herself believe that she might lose him to duty and obligation. "I don't want to be part of your duty, Kieran," Tanya whispered, turning away. "I can't be." And with that, she walked away from him, her heart torn between love and the reality of their worlds, a world that could never truly be hers. The days after their confrontation in the royal gardens felt like an endless blur of pain and confusion. Tanya couldn't shake the image of Kieran's face, his eyes full of regret, his voice thick with unspoken promises. She had walked away from him that day, not out of anger, but out of fear. Fear that she wasn't enough for him. Fear that no matter how much he claimed to care, their worlds were just too far apart. She spent the following days buried in her duties, locking herself away in the quiet corners of the palace where no one could see her. The grand ballroom and the royal halls felt suffocating, the whispers of the court following her everywhere she went. She had seen the looks of pity in the eyes of the other servants, heard the whispers of the nobles when they passed by her in the hall. The truth was clear. She didn't belong here. She was a maid, and Prince Kieran was a prince. Tanya felt like a fool for allowing herself to hope, for allowing herself to believe that there could be a future, a love that spanned across the divide between them. The very thought seemed absurd now. She had been a fool to think it was anything more than a fleeting attraction, a moment of royal whimsy that would disappear as quickly as it had arrived. And Kieran. Tanya didn't know what to believe anymore. How could she? He had said all the right things, but words were just words. And now, faced with the reality of his duty, his obligations, Tanya knew she was the last thing on his mind. He had to marry Felicia. It was what was expected. It was what his family wanted. And no matter how much he cared for her, it was never going to be enough to change his fate. Her chest tightened as she moved through the quiet halls of the servants' wing, the dull thud of her shoes against the stone floor echoing through the empty space. She hadn't seen him since their conversation, and the absence of his presence weighed heavily on her. She had asked for space, for time to think. But now, with each passing day, the distance between them only seemed to grow wider. Tanya turned a corner and nearly collided with someone. She stopped, startled, her heart leaping into her throat. "Oh, I'm sorry, Your Highness," she said quickly, instinctively bowing, though her voice was barely a whisper. It was Kieran. He was standing there, looking as though he had just been waiting for her to appear. His face was tired, his jaw clenched, and his eyes, those familiar dark eyes, held a vulnerability that made her stomach twist. "Tanya, please," he said quietly, stepping toward her. His hand reached out, though she took a small step back, unsure of how to respond. "I've been looking for you." Tanya's heart skipped a beat, but she quickly masked her emotions, pulling herself together. "Why? What is there to talk about, Kieran? We both know where we stand." He stepped closer, his hand still outstretched, but this time she didn't pull away. Instead, she stared at his hand as if it were a lifeline she couldn't reach. "I've made a terrible mistake," Kieran said, his voice filled with regret. I should never have put you in this position. You deserve better than this. Better than me. Tanya's throat tightened as she looked at him. You're right. I do deserve better than this. I deserve to be loved, Kieran, without all the complications, without the duty, the expectations. But I'm not the woman for you. You belong with her, she said, her voice wavering. You belong with Felicia. Kieran's face hardened, and for a moment, Tanya wondered if he would agree. But then, to her surprise, he shook his head. No, I belong with you. Tanya couldn't hold back the tear that slipped down her cheek, her emotions raw and uncontained. But you don't get it, do you? She whispered, her voice thick with emotion. You can't have both. You can't marry her and still be with me. Your world doesn't work that way. Kieran closed the distance between them, his voice low, filled with a quiet desperation. I know, but I don't want that world. I don't want to marry her. I don't want a marriage of duty, Tanya. I want a marriage of love. And I want that with you. His words echoed in the silent hall, and for a moment Tanya almost believed him, almost let herself surrender to the hope that had been growing inside her. But she knew better than that. She had seen the way his family treated her, seen the way they looked at her as if she were invisible. Don't make promises you can't keep, she said, her voice trembling. You can't just change the rules because of me. I'm not a princess, Kieran. I'm not someone who can be by your side in the way you need. I'm just a maid, and I'll never be more than that. Tanya could see the pain in his eyes as he reached for her again, but this time she stepped back, shaking her head. No, she said, her voice firm now. You need to go back to your life, your kingdom, your responsibilities, and I need to figure out mine. For a long moment they stood there, the tension between them thick enough to suffocate. Kieran opened his mouth to speak, but Tanya silenced him with a look that said everything, even though her heart was breaking. I'm sorry, Kieran. I can't be part of your world, she whispered. Not like this. And with that, she turned and walked away from him. She didn't look back, though every step felt like it was breaking her into 1,000 pieces. As she retreated into the quiet of the servants' quarters, Tanya could hear her own heart breaking in her chest. She had always known she was nothing more than a maid. But for a moment, she had dared to dream of something more. And now, that dream had been shattered. Tanya spent the next few days in a haze, a blur of emotions, responsibilities, and the quiet hum of life at the palace. The weight of her decision, the decision to walk away from Kieran, hung heavily over her. Every glance from the other servants, every passing moment she spent alone in her quarters, only made the doubt inside her grow. Had she done the right thing? Or had she thrown away the only chance she would ever have at true happiness? Her heart ached every time she thought about him. Prince Kieran, the man who had promised her the world, only for her to push him away because of fear, the fear that had plagued her for so long. Fear that she wasn't good enough. Fear that she didn't belong in his world. But as the days passed, something began to shift inside her. She started to realize something important. This wasn't just about Kieran or the palace. This was about her, about how she had spent her whole life believing she wasn't worthy, that her place in the world was confined to the shadows, to the role she had been born into. And if she was going to truly move forward, she couldn't let that fear control her anymore. She had always been content to accept her place as a maid. She had been raised to do her duty, to serve without complaint, and to know her worth was found in the service she provided. But in the quiet of her room, late at night when all the world around her slept, Tanya began to ask herself one simple question. Was that really enough? Her answer came unexpectedly one morning when she was summoned to the royal gardens. She had been dreading this moment, knowing that it would be Kieran asking for another chance. He had been sending her letters, each one more heartfelt than the last, filled with apologies and promises of a future together. But Tanya had ignored them. She couldn't let herself fall into the trap again. But when she arrived in the garden, there he was, standing by the fountain, waiting for her, as if the world around them didn't matter, as if nothing had changed. "Tanya," Kieran said softly, his voice steady but filled with an emotion she could feel even from a distance. "Please, hear me out." She stopped a few feet away, her arms crossed defensively in front of her. She couldn't let herself get too close to him, not after everything that had happened, not after she had walked away, after she had chosen to protect herself. "I can't keep doing this, Kieran," she said, her voice thick with emotion. "I don't belong in your world. I don't belong in the life you're expected to live. It's not fair to either of us." He shook his head, his dark eyes filled with determination. "That's not how I see it, Tanya. You do belong in my world. You belong with me." She let out a sharp laugh, bitter and uncertain. "And what does that mean? You want me to be by your side while your kingdom falls apart? While your duty to your family, your crown, and your people weighs on you every day?" Kieran's expression softened. "No, I don't want that. I don't want a life of duty and obligation. I want a life with you. I want to choose you, Tanya. Every day, over everything else. You make me see the world differently. You make me feel like I can actually breathe." His words struck her deep, resonating with the fears she had kept buried inside for so long. The truth she had been too afraid to face. Could she really trust him? Could she trust that he wasn't just saying what he thought she needed to hear? "I'm scared, Kieran," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "I'm scared of being hurt, of giving everything I have to something that might never be mine. I'm scared that you'll change your mind, that you'll realize I'm just a maid, and I'll never be enough for you." The vulnerability in her voice made his chest tighten. He reached for her hand gently, and this time she didn't pull away. "You are enough," he said, his voice quiet but full of certainty. "You've always been enough. You've never been just a maid to me, Tanya. I see you for who you are. And I love you. Just you. Not a title. Not a position. Just you." Tanya's chest tightened as the flood of emotions she had been holding back finally broke free. The walls she had built to protect herself, the walls that had kept her isolated from the world, from Kieran, began to crumble. "I don't know how to do this," she said, tears welling up in her eyes. "I don't know how to trust that this isn't a dream. That you won't wake up one day and realize I'm not the woman you need." Kieran's thumb brushed against the back of her hand, grounding her, steadying her. "Tanya," he said softly, "this is real, and I'm not going anywhere. I've never been more certain of anything in my life. You don't have to know how to trust me. You just have to let me show you." For the first time since their conversation in the garden days ago, Tanya let herself look at him fully, without fear, without doubt. She saw the sincerity in his eyes, the strength in his grip. And in that moment, she knew. She knew that love wasn't about perfection, or status, or the grand gestures. It was about trust. And she was ready to trust him, to trust herself. "I'm scared, Kieran," she whispered again, her voice shaking. "But I think I'm ready to try." Kieran's smile was small but filled with a quiet joy, a joy that seemed to light up the entire world around them. "That's all I ask for, Tanya. Just one chance. And I promise, I'll spend every day showing you that you're more than enough, that you've always been more than enough." In that moment, the world seemed to shift. The fears that had once held Tanya back now felt smaller, less important. There would always be challenges, always be expectations that threatened to tear them apart. But together, they could face them. Together they could build a life, not bound by titles or duty, but by the love they had found in each other. The royal court was abuzz with anticipation. The grand hall, adorned with tapestries and sparkling chandeliers, was filled with nobles, dignitaries, and foreign diplomats. The air was thick with the whispers of those who had gathered to witness the most significant event in Talbora's recent history, Prince Kieran's betrothal announcement. For weeks, rumors had swirled about who the prince would choose as his bride. Some believed it would be Felicia, the daughter of the Duke of Helver, whose marriage to Kieran had been practically arranged since childhood. Others believed the prince would go the traditional route, choosing a noblewoman who could secure alliances and strengthen the kingdom's ties to neighboring lands. But today, all eyes were on the prince as he stood at the head of the grand hall, ready to announce his decision. Tanya stood in the back of the room, hidden behind the velvet curtains. Her heart was racing, her palms clammy. This was it. This was the moment that would change everything. The moment when Kieran would either choose his duty to the kingdom or choose her. For days, Tanya had grappled with her emotions, her fears, her doubts, the heavy weight of the decision that Kieran had to make. She knew it wouldn't be easy. She had known from the start that he was a prince, bound by his responsibilities. But when he had confessed his love for her, when he had told her he was ready to defy his family's expectations, Tanya had allowed herself to believe in the impossible. She had allowed herself to believe in a love that could cross the boundaries of their worlds. But the reality of the situation was hitting her now. Kieran's duty was to the kingdom. His duty was to his people, to the future of Talbora. And even if he loved her, could he really choose her over all of that? The prince's voice echoed through the hall, a mix of strength and uncertainty. Ladies and gentlemen, nobles of Talbora, it is with great responsibility and a heavy heart that I stand before you today. As you all know, my family and I have spent years preparing for this moment, the moment when I would announce my bride, the woman who will help lead this kingdom beside me. Tanya's chest tightened, the sound of Kieran's voice ringing in her ears. Her legs felt weak, but she couldn't tear herself away. She had to see this through. She had to face whatever came next. Kieran's gaze swept over the room, pausing for a brief second on Felicia, who stood at the front, her face composed and perfect, the picture of what a future queen should look like. Tanya's heart twisted. Felicia was beautiful, poised, and noble. She was everything Kieran was supposed to marry. But then Kieran's gaze shifted, and for the briefest of moments, their eyes met across the room. Tanya's breath caught in her throat. His look was filled with such intensity, such depth, that for a moment the entire world seemed to fade away. There was no palace, no court, no expectations. There was only the two of them. And then Kieran spoke again, his voice steady but filled with emotion. The woman I have chosen to be my bride is someone who has shown me what it means to live outside the constraints of duty. Someone who has shown me the strength of character, the beauty of spirit, and the depth of love. She is not a noblewoman. She is not someone who has been groomed for this position. She is someone who deserves to be loved for who she is, not for what she represents. Tanya's heart stopped. The words felt like a thunderclap in her chest. She barely dared to believe what was happening. I have chosen Tanya, Kieran continued, his voice echoing through the hall. The woman who has shown me that love is worth fighting for, no matter the cost. The room fell into stunned silence. The nobility exchanged shocked glances, their faces frozen in disbelief. Felicia, standing at the front, had gone pale, her jaw tight with restrained fury. Tanya felt a flush of heat rise in her cheeks as the eyes of the entire court turned toward her. Kieran, Felicia said, her voice trembling with anger. You cannot be serious. She's a maid. She's beneath you. The words stung, but Tanya refused to let them break her. She was more than what Felicia said. She was more than the label that had been placed on her. And Kieran had just proven that to her. He had chosen her, not because of her status, but because of who she was. I am serious, Felicia, Kieran said, his voice firm, never wavering. Tanya is the woman I want by my side. She's the woman I love, and I will not let the expectations of the past control my future. The tension in the room was palpable, but Kieran stood his ground, his hand reaching out for Tanya, his eyes never leaving hers. With a hesitant, shaky breath, Tanya took a step forward, walking toward him. She could feel the weight of the world on her shoulders, but with each step, her confidence grew. She wasn't just walking toward him, she was walking toward the life she had always dreamed of, the life that she deserved. As she reached Kieran, he took her hand in his, lifting it to his lips. "Tanya," he whispered, his voice filled with warmth and love, "will you marry me?" Tanya looked into his eyes, his real eyes, not the eyes of a prince surrounded by duty, but the eyes of the man who had shown her love, who had seen her for who she truly was. The fear that had held her back for so long melted away, replaced by a quiet certainty. She had no idea what the future held, what challenges they would face. But in this moment, she knew that she was ready. "Yes," she whispered, her voice breaking. "I will marry you." The room erupted into applause, though the shock and whispers still lingered in the air. But for Tanya, none of that mattered anymore. She wasn't just a maid anymore. She was the woman the prince loved, and together they would face whatever the future held, together as equals. The months that followed the royal announcement were a whirlwind of change, not just for Tanya and Kieran, but for the entire kingdom of Talbora. The news of their engagement had sent shockwaves through the court, and while the whispers had gradually quieted, the weight of their decision was still felt in every corner of the palace. But Tanya had never felt more at peace. Every day was a reminder that love, true love, had the power to transcend expectations, break down barriers, and defy even the strictest royal traditions. She had come to realize that her worth wasn't defined by her station, her title, or the job she had once held. It was defined by the love and strength she had within herself, and by the way Kieran saw her, not as a maid, but as a woman worthy of everything. The preparations for the wedding were a blur of royal dresses, intricate gowns, and endless meetings with diplomats and nobles. But Tanya never once faltered. She stood beside Kieran as an equal, his partner, his love, his queen. On the morning of their wedding, Tanya stood in front of a grand mirror, her wedding dress fitting her perfectly. It was elegant and simple, a testament to the woman she had become, a woman who had never imagined this day, but had now embraced it with a fierce heart. Her mother, who had come from the village to witness the ceremony, stood beside her, her eyes glistening with unshed tears. "You look beautiful, my darling," her mother said, her voice trembling with pride. "I can't believe this is happening." Tanya smiled, a soft laugh escaping her lips. "I can't believe it either, Mama. I never thought I'd see the day I'd be marrying a prince, let alone someone who loves me for me." Her mother's eyes softened as she cupped Tanya's face in her hands. "You deserve this, Tanya. You've always deserved more than you've given yourself credit for. This is your dream coming true." As Tanya stepped into the royal carriage, the weight of the crown, metaphorically speaking, didn't feel heavy anymore. It felt light. Because it wasn't about the throne or the expectations of the royal family. It was about the love that had grown between her and Kieran, the life they had chosen to build together. The grand cathedral was filled with the kingdom's most important figures, each one watching the couple with eager anticipation. And there, at the altar, stood Kieran. He was the same prince she had danced with all those months ago, the same man who had looked at her with such intensity and love, the same man who had chosen her when everything in his life told him not to. When their eyes met across the room, Tanya felt her heart race again, the same way it had when they first locked eyes in the garden, when she had been nothing but a maid, and he, a prince. But now, they were equals. Now, they stood together, not bound by duty, but by love. As Tanya walked down the aisle, each step brought her closer to the life she had never believed was possible. She had learned that love was not something to be feared, not something to be hidden behind walls of duty and insecurity. Love was about trust, vulnerability, and the courage to believe in something more than what you could see. When she reached Kieran, he took her hands in his eyes glistening with emotion. "You are everything I've ever wanted, Tanya," he whispered, his voice thick with feeling. Tanya smiled, her heart swelling with joy. "And you are everything I never knew I needed." The priest's words were a blur as the ceremony continued, but Tanya didn't hear anything except the sound of her own heartbeat, the way Kieran's thumb gently brushed against her hand, the warmth of his gaze as he looked at her. When the vows were exchanged, and the moment came to seal their promise with a kiss, Tanya felt the entire world fade away. There was no kingdom, no politics, no royal expectations. There was only Kieran, and the love they had built. As the kiss lingered, the crowd erupted in applause, but Tanya's focus was solely on the man before her. The man who had fought for her, who had chosen her not because of her station, but because of who she was. When the ceremony ended and they stepped out into the sunlight as husband and wife, Tanya realized that this was only the beginning. There would be challenges ahead, there always were, but for the first time, she felt ready to face them. Not as a maid, not as someone beneath everyone else, but as her, as the woman Kieran had loved and chosen. And together they would build a future, not bound by duty or obligation, but by love.